So we are now into the 14th session. This tonight is going to be Zechariah chapter 9, and I've called it Zechariah Prophesies Against Nations and the Promise of a Coming King for Jerusalem. So we'll get right into this. I find this very interesting. Hopefully you will too. First, again, I'm going to read the entire chapter, and then I'll come back and we'll go through it. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 1. The burden of the word of Yahweh is against the land of Hadrach, with Damascus as its resting place, for the eyes of men, especially of all the tribes of Israel, are toward Yahweh. And Hamath also, which borders on it, Tyre and Sidon, though they are very wise. For Tyre built herself a fortress and piled up silver like dust, and gold like the mire of the streets. Behold, the Lord will dispose her and cast her wealth into the sea, and she will be consumed with fire. Ashkelon will see it and be afraid. Gaza too will writhe in great pain. Also Ekron, for her expectation has been confounded. Moreover, the king will perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon will not be inhabited. And a Mongol race will dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. And I will remove their blood from their mouth and their detestable things from between their teeth. And they also will be a remnant for our God, and be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron like a Jebusite. But I will camp around my house because of an army, because of him who passes by and returns. And no oppressor will pass over them any more. For now I have seen with my eyes. Verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble, and mounted on a donkey, even a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the bow of war will be cut off. And he will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to the stronghold, O prisoners who have the hope. This very day I am declaring that I will restore double to you. For I will bend Judah as my bow. I will fill the bow with Ephraim, and I will stir up your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece. And I will make you like a warrior's sword. Then Yahweh will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. And the Lord Yahweh will blow the trumpet, and will march in the storm winds of the south. Yahweh of hosts will defend them, and they will devour and trample on the sling stones. And they will drink and be boisterous as with wine. And they will be filled like a sacrificial basin, drenched like the corners of the altar. And Yahweh their God will save them in that day, as the flock of his people. For they are as the stones of a crown sparkling in his hand. For what comeliness and beauty will be theirs! Grain will make the young men flourish, and the new wine the virgins. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Well, the first thing I want to point out is this word, the burden of the word of Yahweh. It comes up two more times in this section of Zechariah. The word burden in verse 1, it's the Hebrew word masa. The word basically simply means a lifting up. It's used of carrying a load, as a donkey carrying a load, a beast of burden. It's used as a burden of service, such as the burden put upon the Levites in their service of the tabernacle. When used as it is here with the prophetic word of Yahweh, it means a lifting up the voice, a pronouncement of Yahweh. It is a technical term introducing a message from Yahweh. Some versions you'll see translate this as oracle, but it's the word masa. It's the word burden or lifting up. The New English translation suggests that since the root can also mean to carry a burden, it is suggested it is the nuance of being a burdensome message. And these all are in your syllabus, by the way. We're on starting on page 62 tonight in your syllabus. And all these are in there, these verses. These are other places in Scripture where this word burden or masa is used in relation to prophecy. So it's used a lot there in Isaiah and then a few other places in Proverbs, and then here in Zechariah. Early on, I think in like the third or fourth session when I first introduced the book of Zechariah, I told you there are five different times where I think that the prophecy was given to Zechariah. And there's key phrases throughout that we've looked at. First one was just in verse 1, the word of Yahweh came is the key phrase that starts that prophetic vision or prophecy to Zechariah. The next was that one where we saw the 8 visions. That's from Zechariah 1 all the way through chapter 6, 1:7 through 6. And that one also starts out the word of Yahweh came. And then the next one we looked at last time occurred in the 4th year, the 9th month of Darius, and that starts out the word of Yahweh came. And now you have these 2 more. And they both start out this way, the burden of the word of Yahweh. So I think what we're looking at tonight, chapter 9, and then next time we'll look at chapters 10 and 11, is all one vision or one prophecy of Zechariah occurred at one time. And then the last 3 chapters, chapter 12 through 14, is also one unit of a prophecy that starts out the burden of the word of Yahweh. So those are the 5 main prophecies in this 14-chapter book. But tonight we're on this one, starting here in chapter 9, the burden of Yahweh. And if you're like me, I was asking myself the question, who are these nations or these cities in these first 7 verses? And I'd like to take some time to look at this. I think I find it interesting. Hopefully you'll find it interesting too, especially since we looked a little bit about the nations earlier that had been coming up against them at the time of the reconstruction of the temple. And this is interesting, the ones that are listed here specifically, why God prophesies against these. I think it's interesting. But first, I wanted to consider, because I'm going to show you a lot of map tonight and consider the land of Israel, the land that was originally promised to Abraham, to Moses, and to Joshua, and what were the boundaries of Israel. In Genesis 15:18 through 21 is when God first shows Abram the boundaries of the land that he is going to give to him, and it's from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. In Exodus 23, when Moses is speaking, he says, I'll fill your boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, from the wilderness to the river Euphrates. In Deuteronomy, at the end of the time of Moses, he's telling what's going to happen. He said he's going to drive out the nations, and their border will be from the wilderness to Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, as far as the western sea. And then in the first chapter of Joshua, he tells Joshua the borders of the land that he's going to give them, that they're going to go in and take. And this is what he tells them. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, as far as the great sea. So here is this region, and I'd like to just go over these boundaries with you, and then we'll start looking more at specifically the nations. So first of all, what's the river of Egypt? I had thought for years that maybe it's the Nile, but the Nile is hundreds of miles away to the east of here, and that's in the center of Egypt. the Nile River. Um, and I have always wondered if right here on the edge of what has always been the boundary between Israel and Egypt is it's called the Brook of Egypt. You look at modern day maps, they'll call it the Wadi of Egypt. And I think it's one of those valleys in the desert where water will come down and then it runs into the Mediterranean Sea. And it's known as the Brook or the Wadi of Egypt. And I wonder if that's the river. I'm not sure, but that has always been the southern southeast boundary of the land of Israel. And on the other side of it has always been Egypt. Except there was one time, was it one of those battles, 1968 war, where they took Sinai Peninsula for, I don't know, it was a short time, and then they gave it back, but Israel did. And then the River Euphrates, that's pretty obvious. That's up here. The River Euphrates, up here on the north. And then on the south is the Red Sea. This is the Gulf of Aqaba. There at the tip of the Red Sea, that's the southern tip. And then in these records mentioned the Western Sea, the Sea of the Philistines, the Great Sea. That is most likely the Mediterranean Sea. That's the eastern border of the land of Israel. And then the wilderness. Wilderness in the lands of the Bible, wilderness is not a forest, it's not trees. In the Bible, a wilderness is desert. The wilderness is desert. It's not trees and forests. It's desert, no water. It's wilderness. And the wilderness, the Negev here is all wilderness between the southern tip of what's Beersheba and the Dead Sea down to the Gulf of Aqaba. That's pretty much desert in the Negev. And the southern tips, these were wildernesses that they wandered during the 40 years, the wilderness of Zin, the wilderness of Edom, the wilderness of Moab. This is all part of this wilderness area in southern Israel. And then Lebanon, it mentioned Lebanon was mentioned. Lebanon is up here. Lebanon has always been up there. That's Lebanon. And then, of course, the Jordan River is this part of Israel. So these are the boundaries that was always promised to Abraham. Israel at times has had a lot of this area. Other times they've had just a small portion of this area. But these were the boundaries promised to Abraham, to Moses, to Joshua, and the sons of Israel. These are the boundaries that are mentioned. Now, during the time of David and Solomon was the greatest expansion of Israel, probably until what modern Israel has today. But at the time of David, that outline in red, that's David's, what David had conquered and overcame. It went all the way down to the Red Sea, to the Brook of Egypt, to the Western Sea, and then it expanded under that blue dotted line. Was a sphere of influence under Solomon, actually reached up into the Euphrates River. But they never really took over that area of Syria. So the areas that have always kind of been not Israel, but right there on their boundaries, is that land of Syria. And then up here in the north is Lebanon. And then down here in the south is Philistia. Those are always portions of Israel that have always been in conflict with them. Even at the time of David, these were problematic of cities. These are the ones that we saw earlier of nations that rise up. So now, with that in mind, let's look at the cities or nations that are listed here that the burden of Yahweh is against. And it mentions the land of Hadrach and Damascus, Hamath, Tyre and Sidon, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, Ashdod, and the Philistines. So, what is this? Well, we'll take a look. First of all, the land of Hadrach. And I'll go back and forth between these verses and the map. The land of Hadrach, pretty much everything that I can read and understand, is basically Syria, Aram. So this burden of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach. Also Damascus. Well, what's Damascus? Damascus is the capital of Syria. Damascus, to this day, is the capital city of Samaria. That's also part of Syria. And then Hamath. Hamath is both a city and a region up to the Euphrates River in the northern part of Syria. So those cities, that area is Syria. Basically, that's Syria, of who this burden of Yahweh is when it mentions those cities or those nations. And then it mentions Tyre and Sidon. Well, what's Tyre and Sidon? They're over here on the coast. Tyre and Sidon are the primary cities of Lebanon. So, what is this? This is Lebanon, these cities. And then you have these cities here. Ashkelon. Ashkelon is there in the orange. Gaza. There's Gaza. And that Gaza is the same as Gaza City today. Gaza. There's Ekron. Ekron is there. Ashdod. Ashdod is there. And the Philistines. The Philistines is this whole region. That's the Philistines. So who are these nations that the burden of Yahweh is against? Syria, Lebanon, and the Philistines. You could today change the Philistines to the Gaza Strip. Huh. Isn't that interesting? There's Jerusalem, by the way. So Syria, Yahweh is against the land of Hadrach with Damascus as its resting place and Hamath, which borders it. The other interesting thing when you look at this, and I never really thought about this, I had studied Isaiah, I'd studied Ezekiel, I'd studied the 12, looked at the prophecies in Jeremiah. These are the nations that are prophesied against in all these prophets. Other prophecies against Damascus, Syria is Isaiah 17:1, the whole chapter, Jeremiah 49, and the book of Amos. Lebanon, Tyre and Sidon, though wise and piled up with silver and gold, her wealth will be cast into the sea, and she will be consumed with fire. Other prophecies against Tyre and Sidon in the prophets, Isaiah chapter 23, Ezekiel chapter 26, all the way through Ezekiel 28, and Amos 1. And then the Philistines. Ashkelon will see and be afraid and not be inhabited. Gaza too will writhe in pain. Ekron has been confounded. A mongrel waste will dwell in Ashdod. Yahweh will cut off the pride of the Philistines. Other prophecies against the Philistines. Jeremiah, the entire chapter 47. Ezekiel chapter 25. And Amos 1, 9, 6 through 8. Since Amos is mentioned 3 times in one short chapter, I thought I'd read Amos to you and see this here in Amos, these same nations. Amos 1, 3 through 10. Thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4 I will not revoke its punishment, because they threshold Gilead, which implements sharp irons. So I will send a fire upon the house of Hazael, and it will consume the citadels of Ben-Hadad. And I will break the gate bar of Damascus, cut off the inhabitant from the valley of Avon, and him who holds the scepter from Beth Aden, so the people of Aram will go exiled to Kir, says Yahweh. For thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they deported an entire population to deliver it up to Edom. So I will send firewall upon the wall of Gaza, and it will consume with her citadels. I will also cut off the inhabitants of Ashdod, and him who holds the scepter from Ashkelon, and I will unleash my power upon Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines will perish. For thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Tyre, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they have delivered up an entire population to Edom, and did not remember the covenant of the brotherhood. So I will send firewall upon Tyre, and it will consume her citadels. Again, what nations are we talking about here in Amos? Syria, Lebanon, and the Philistines, or today the Gaza Strip. These are the nations that God specifically prophesies not only here in Amos, not only in Zechariah, but in Ezekiel, in Jeremiah, in Isaiah. These nations are mentioned over and over again. Um, I think that we should take note of that. I think that should mean something. Um, Another thing that I pointed out to you that I believe, and I think it probably is true, that Psalm 79, 70, 79, 80, 81, 82, and 83 are the final Psalms of the sons of Asaph. And I believe these 5 Psalms were written from the sons of Asaph who had come back from captivity during about the time that we're talking about here with the book of Zechariah, or in the exile somewhere in that time after the captivity into Babylon through the time of their return in exile. That's when these Psalms were written. And I looked at some of these earlier in 79, 80, 81, and 82, but specifically, I want to show you this part of the prophecy of this time period in Psalm 83. Look at this, because I was amazed when I looked at these nations. Now, the only nations that we haven't come up here that we had talked about when we looked at the book of Ezra, when we looked at the nations that were coming up, other nations that were coming up and mentioned, and ones that were mentioned in the Apocrypha, in the books of Josephus, were the other nations of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. If you remember, those nations on the western side, or on the eastern side of the River Jordan. But look at this list, this particular, and look at the wording of this Psalm 83. A similar list of nations, these enemies of Israel, Psalm 83, 1 through 8. O God, do not remain quiet. Do not remain silent, O God. Do not be still. Behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, come, let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. That sounds to me like that could have been written today. Let's wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be no more. Verse 5, for they have conspired together with one mind. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria has also joined them, and they have become help to the children of Lot. So who are these nations in this prophecy that are going to conspire together as one to wipe Israel off the map? Who are they? Edom and the Ishmaelites. Now, the Ishmaelites is interesting. Ishmaelites really don't have a nation. They don't have a land ever that you could see with Ishmael. And I actually went back and looked at this. The Ishmaelites lived, if you remember, Ishmael came from Abraham through Hagar. Remember? And Sarah said, get the slave woman out of here. And she went and ran away, and she was going to die. And the angel of the Lord said, don't worry. No, you're going to be okay. And the angel of Yahweh said to her, behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because Yahweh has given heed to your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live to the east. There he is. There is Ishmael, to the east of all his brothers. And I think NET's commentary is correct on this use of Ishmael will be like a wild donkey of a man. The prophecy is not an insult. The wild donkey lived a solitary existence in the desert, away from society. Ishmael would be free roaming, strong, and like a Bedouin. He would enjoy the freedom of his mother's sod. Ishmael is today the Nation of Islam traces themselves back to Ishmael. There's one place in Scripture where Ishmaelites are used alongside the Midianites. Another place, I think they're used alongside the Amalekites. They are a nation, a desert-dwelling, nomads, Bedouin, And they kind of assist and are part of all these. Here they're mentioned actually with Edom. Anyways, Ishmaelites could be Saudi Arabia. Ishmael is this area to the east. And then you have Moab, the Hagrites. Gebal is there. Hagrites is really Syria. It's north there in that side of Israel. The north is Syria. Ammon. Ammon and Moab were the children of Lot. Amalek. Amalek is there in the south. It's the southern tip. It's some people associate Egypt with Amalek, but really it's not into Egypt. It's there. And then Philistia. Again, Philistia. And Tyre. Tyre and Gebal. They are both Lebanon. So now Assyria is the one that's really far. Assyria is a long way from here. But I wonder if the use of Assyria here is actually the understanding that Assyrians during 2 Kings 17:24, after they carried Israel away, the king of Assyria sent Assyrians into northern Israel, into the land of Samaria. In fact, in the book of Ezra, these are some of the ones that came up against them when building the temple. Now, Ezra 4:1, the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the people of the exile were building the temple of the Lord. They approached Zerubbabel and said, let us build with you like you seek your God, and have been sacrificing to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us up here. So I think that use of Assyria there in the Psalms, if it's written at this time, is actually talking about these Assyrians who had moved into the land of Samaria. But once again, these are the nations. These are the nations that God prophesies against, not only in Zechariah, but also in the book of Psalms, also in Isaiah, also in Jeremiah, also in Ezekiel, also in Amos. These are the nations. And they've helped from the children of Lot. That's Ammon and Moab. So these are these nations here. These are the nations listed in Zechariah chapter 9. Well, what's the conflict in Israel today? Well, Jerusalem's there in the center. And up here you have Syria and Lebanon. There's Tyre. Ashdod and Ashkelon are actually cities. They're actually part of Israel today, but they're down here. Gaza is still there. Rafah, that's that city on the south of the Gaza Strip. And that's the Gaza Strip today, right there. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. And over here, Jordan is what would be Ammon, Moab, and Edom is now Jordan. And what's known as the West Bank, it's the West Bank of Jordan. It's actually Jordanians moved into that area that is known as the West Bank. And these are the nations today in 2025 that are the nations that are against or in conflict with the nation of Israel. So I might not be a smart man, but it looks to me as though whatever's going to happen at the end of the age, somehow these nations are going to be involved in this covenant, in this grouping together. If what is talked about in that they make an agreement with 10 nations that is in Daniel, and the 10 nations as in the book of Revelation, and they have some covenant agreement with Israel. And, what is it everybody's talking about? We're going to make peace in the Middle East. And there's going to be a peace agreement. Everything's going to look great. But then the end's going to come, and these nations are going to be against Israel. So then what happens? These nations God has punishment against, but these nations of the world. Now, mind you, there's nothing in the scripture about the United States or Great Britain or Japan or China or, the nations that are mentioned in the Bible are these nations that are there. So I think we're right. Are we at the end times? I don't know, but I think when it does come time for the end times, it's very likely that these are the nations that will be making an agreement with Israel, and then we'll break that agreement. And then they will come up against the nations, and they're going to surround Israel. We're going to look at this later in another thing. They're going to surround Jerusalem, but God has hope. Verse 8, but I will camp around my house because of an army, because of him who passes by and returns, and no oppressor will pass over them anymore. For now I have seen with my eyes, this is Yahweh talking, and here Yahweh gives the hope, his hope. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Does that remind you of something? It should. As a matter of fact, I believe this Sunday coming up, we call it Palm Sunday. And this is when Jesus went and he got a donkey and the colt of a foal of a donkey. And he did what's called the triumphal entry. Has this been fulfilled? This part of Zechariah, Matthew 21, 1 through 5. When they had approached Jerusalem and come to Bethphage, the Mount of Olives, and Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied there, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them. This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet that we're reading right here in Zechariah chapter 9. Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, and the foal of a beast of burden. And also in John chapter 12, about the same time of this triumphal entry. On the next day, the large crowd who had come to the feast when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem took the branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and began to shout, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh, even the King of Israel. Jesus, finding a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. These things his disciples did not understand at first. But when Jesus was glorified, they remembered that these were written of him, and that they had done these things to him. So you can imagine why the people of Israel, when Jesus starts descending from the Mount of Olives on the donkey, and they believe he is the Messiah, the king, why they got their palm leaves, and why they said, blessed is he. They thought this was it. They were ready for the rest of Zechariah to be fulfilled. Because the way it's worded in Zechariah is, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just, endowed with salvation, humble, mounted on a donkey, even a colt, the foal of a donkey. And then it says, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem, and the war will be cut off, and he will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. That's amazing. That's what the prophecy is. The first time Jesus came in humility, he fulfilled verse 9, coming as the one that's humble, and he gave his life for mankind. When he comes the next time, he's going to do verse 10. He's going to do this part of the prophecy. Zechariah 9 is a prophecy of the first coming of the Messiah. Zechariah 9, 10 through 12 is a prophecy of his second coming. Now it will come about in the last days. This is part of what's going to happen, as prophesied in other prophets. The mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as chief of the mountains, and he will raise up above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. And many people will come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations, will render decision for many peoples. They will hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for many mighty distant nations. They will hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Verse 7, Psalm 72, 7 and 8. In his days may the righteous flourish in the abundance of peace till moon is no more. May he also rule from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. The same thing spoken of here in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10. Again, this is Jesus in his second coming. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, from the horse from Jerusalem, and the bow of war will be cut off, and he will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, and from the rivers to the end of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, when you think about that, what was the blood shed for the covenant? It was the Messiah who gave his life after he came down there. With the blood covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to the stronghold, O prisoners who have the hope. For this very day, I am declaring that I will restore double to you. I've thought a little bit about this waterless pit. You know the first place use of a waterless pit? It's all the way back in the book of Genesis. Remember, Joseph dreamed the dreams and his brothers hated him, right? They took away his coat and they said, let's kill him. And Reuben, the other one, says, don't kill him. And they put him in a pit with no water in it, a waterless pit. And he was a prisoner. And then that's in chapter 7, Genesis 37. That's where it says a band of Moabites were coming by. They pull him out of the pit and they sell him. It says they sell him to Ishmaelites. So that's again where Ishmaelites and the Midianites were together as one, the same people. But anyways, so that's a pit. And the use of pit, you look at it, it's always a use like of a prison. It's a waterless pit is where they would put the prisoners. And it's used metaphorically as where you rescue out from a prisoner. There's that psalm, he took me out of the pit, and from the miry clay, he set my feet on a rock, establishing my way. He put a song on my heart, my God to magnify, and he'll take me someday to his home on. And I remember the song? Yeah. Okay, anyways. The bottom of the pit. What this represents, and I think it also is associated with Sheol, with death. What is the ultimate thing that's going to happen when the Messiah returns? He's going to rescue us from the pit. Everybody, Israel, all of us they're going to get new bodies. We're going to have hope. That's our prisoner's hope. This very day, he's going to restore double to us, to Israel, to those who have faith. When this Messiah comes, when this king that's coming comes. The proof he came the first time he fulfilled that first part of Zechariah, he's going to fulfill this part of Zechariah. The king is coming. The king is coming. There's nations around Israel. There's nations around Israel that want to destroy Israel, that want to blow Israel off the map, that want to destroy this nation of God's people. But Jesus is coming. The Messiah for Israel is coming. And when he comes, those nations are going to get brought under control. He's going to bring peace. He's going to shut off the war from the nations. And that's what this chapter starts out with, these nations, and then it ends with this hope of this coming king who's going to set things straight for Jerusalem. Verse 13, he says, I will bend Judah as my bow. I will fill the bow with Ephraim. Ephraim is northern Israel. Judah is southern Israel. Ephraim's associated with the northern kingdom of Israel. Sometimes it's associated with northern Samaria. And I will stir up your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece, and I will make you like a warrior sword. I can't figure out why Greece is here. I'm not sure. The only time Greece really got involved was during Alexander the Great, the time of the Maccabees. That was when the Greeks influenced. How does this relate to future? I don't know. I don't understand this use of Greece. I kind of wondered if it meant like all the nations against your sons, all the nations, other nations of the world, but I can't get that. I don't know what Greece is, why it's there. I haven't figured that out. But um, then Yahweh will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. Then Yahweh will blow the trumpet, right? And will march in the storm winds of the south. Yahweh of hosts will defend them and will devour and trample on the sling stones, and they will drink and be boisterous as with wine, and they'll be filled with sacrificial basins, drenched like the corners of the altar, and Yahweh their God will save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they are as stones of Corn, sparkle in his land. For what comeliness and beauty is theirs! Grain will make the young men flourish, and the new wine the virgins. Hallelujah. That's a time of hope. It's a time of the coming king. So that's chapter 9. So what can we kind of learn from this? The burden of Yahweh comes to Zechariah speaking against these specific cities or nations that we know of are Syria, Lebanon, and the Philistines. These again were many of the same nations that had been the ones that had attempted to impede the construction of the temple. Then this prophecy ends after this burden against these nations who are against Israel. The prophecy provides hope of a coming king who will first come humbly, riding on a colt. But when this king comes, again, he's going to bring peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea and from the rivers to the ends of the earth. The people at that time, if they heard this prophecy, it looked like it was all going to happen at the same time. The king's going to come in riding in a donkey, and then he's going to take over the nations, bring peace, wars will end. Hasn't happened yet. What can we learn about future prophecy? The first part of the prophecy of this king has been fulfilled. Jesus came into Jerusalem in the triumphal entry, humbly riding a colt, the foal of a donkey. He first came in humility, but he is coming back again. And when he comes again, he will cause wars to cease. He will bring peace to the nations. His dominion will be, as the prophets have spoken, from sea to sea, from the rivers to the ends of the earth, is where this king will rule with peace out of Zion, out of Jerusalem. What can we learn practically for us today? Incredibly, today, these same nations that were giving Israel grief at the time of Zechariah throughout Israel's history are the same nations over 2,500 years later that are the nations coming up against Israel today. And here's our hope. If we are living in the last days, I don't know if we are, but if we are, we can be certain of this, that when this coming king comes, he's coming. He's going to be the Prince of Peace. And all this stuff that's going on with the world, and they're going to try and make a peace agreement. They're going to try and make peace in the Middle East, and it's just going to be chaos. There's going to be a terrible time, but then he's going to come back to Jerusalem a second time. And when that king comes, then there's going to be peace on earth. Hallelujah! So that's my spiel on chapter 9. And next week, we will look at chapters 10 and 11.